The major trophy for Germany from their victory in the Franco-Prussian War was the highly emotive capture of Alsace and Lorraine. This was a huge symbolic loss, and Bismarck had worried that it would lead to France seeking an anti-German alliance. As a result, he set about creating a series of alliances to protect Germany from this eventuality. The first of these was signed in 1879 and bound Germany to Austria-Hungary, a vast empire dominating much of Central and Southeastern Europe. In essence, the purpose of this was defensive, protecting Germany in the north and Austria-Hungary in the Balkans, where Russia resented its influence over the Slavic population. 3 years later, Italy joined to create the Triple Alliance. Bismarck's ultimate fear was that Germany would be forced to fight a war on two fronts, and so he also negotiated a secret treaty with Russia in 1887. But this position of relative security was given up in 1890 when the new Kaiser, Wilhelm II, determined to follow his own diplomatic route, allowed the agreement with Russia to lapse. As a direct consequence, France and Russia, neither willing to remain isolated, signed a pact in early 1894. So as the new century began, Europe had split into two opposing military camps, linked by a web of secret and open alliances. In particular, tension remained high between Russia and Austria-Hungary in the Balkans and between France and Germany over the festering question of Alsace and Lorraine. While Germany had sought security through Bismarck's alliance system, Britain had remained aloof. Yet soon after the turn of the century, it became clear that splendid isolation no longer remained a policy that best served the nation's interests. British isolation ended with the Anglo-Japanese Agreement of 1902, but attention soon turned back to Europe. This was because a belligerent Germany was not only dominating continental Europe, as it had done since the 1870s, but was also beginning to look further afield. Wilhelm II's support for the Boers had worried diplomats and politicians in London, and as the first years of the new century unfolded, Germany replaced both France and Russia as Britain's most obvious natural, political, imperial, and military rival. Increasingly, many came to believe that only an anti-German alliance, coupled with a naval superiority that had protected Britain since Trafalgar, could secure peace. The result of this was the Entente Cordiale, a series of agreements and protocols signed in 1904 between Britain and France. Ostensibly, this focused on tidying up a number of colonial disagreements, including problems in North Africa over rival claims in Egypt and Morocco, and on the Nile, where the two nearly came to war in 1898 at Fashoda in the Sudan. The Entente did not in fact lead to any formal treaty or alliance, but nonetheless it was to have the most enormous psychological impact on European international relations in the decade before World War I. Germany's primary concern since unification in 1871 had always been to maintain its military ascendancy over France. This ascendancy had first been challenged in the 1890s with France's alliance with Russia, but Britain's new understanding with France was a far more serious challenge. With the Entente, the division of Europe into opposing camps was complete. The Kaiser's response was to seek out an opportunity to destroy the rapprochement of 1904, hoping once again to engineer the isolation of France diplomatically. In March 1905, the Kaiser called on the Moroccan Sultan in Tangiers while on a cruise in the Mediterranean and made clear Germany's support for Moroccan independence. This followed France's declaration in 1904 of its interests in acquiring Morocco as a protectorate, a move supported by Britain in the Entente Cordiale. He also demanded an international conference to consider the legality of French and Spanish claims there. This German insistence resulted in the great powers meeting in the southern Spanish town of Algeciras at the beginning of 1906. At the conference, Britain vigorously defended French claims in Morocco and made it clear that it stood by its commitments of 1904. Indeed, it was Germany that left outmaneuvered and isolated, backed only by Austria-Hungary. As such, the first Moroccan crisis of 1905 and the Algeciras Conference had the opposite effect to what the Kaiser intended, strengthening rather than weakening the Entente Cordiale. After Algeciras, the split between the two camps grew even more pronounced, with Britain committing itself more vigorously to the alliance system. This was shown a year later, when in August 1907, a protocol with Russia was signed that agreed spheres of influence in Persia and Afghanistan, concluding the so-called Great Game. In theory, this Anglo-Russian agreement was concerned with non-European matters, but the Kaiser and his government in Berlin saw it in exactly these terms, with it adding to the mistrust and rivalry that had simmered since the 1890s. The Anglo-Russian agreement thus concluded a series of treaties and understandings that had begun in the 1870s, with Britain now committing itself more formally to the alliance system that would later fight World War I. As the diplomatic situation worsened after the first Moroccan crisis, Britain and Germany escalated tension by embarking on a dangerous naval arms race. The Kaiser, ironically an honorary admiral of the fleet in the Royal Navy since 1889, knew of the importance that Britain attached to its naval superiority and was aware of the two-power principle that had been formulated in the 1890s. This stated that Britain should never allow the Royal Navy to become weaker than the combined strength of their next two most powerful rivals combined. From the start of the century, this was challenged by Germany's massive program of naval expansion. In response, the Admiralty developed the revolutionary HMS Dreadnought, which was launched at Portsmouth in a blaze of publicity in February 1906. With its maximum speed of 21 knots and with its revolutionary new firepower and massive steam turbine engines, it was actually the sixth ship, dating back to Tudor times, in the Royal Navy to have been so named. But this sixth version of the HMS Dreadnought was to give its name to a whole new class of battleship. Its launch led to the intensification of Anglo-German naval rivalry, with naval leagues and associations set up in both countries to press for further expansion. In 1906 and 07, the Liberal government had authorized the building of 2 dreadnoughts. In 1908, the German Reichstag passed a law authorizing the construction of 4 a year for 4 years. But as the Bosnian annexation crisis unfolded in 1908, the Admiralty in London demanded the construction of 8 dreadnoughts a year to maintain British naval superiority. In the end, the Cabinet commissioned 4 immediately, but put aside enough money to pay for another 4 if they became necessary. As this naval scare reached its peak in 1909, the British government for the first time admitted the very real threat of a surprise German naval attack. The Anglo-German naval rivalry was to continue and ratchet up tension until the start of the war, 5 years later. While Germany and Britain sparred on the high seas, a series of regional conflicts threatened to drag the 6 great powers into a general war. The first of these arose in Bosnia, which for 400 years had been ruled from Istanbul. With the disintegration of the Ottoman Empire at the end of the 19th century, this had led to an increase in Austro-Hungarian influence in the region. This resulted in Bosnia being made a protectorate of the Habsburg in 1879. In 1908, an anti-Austrian uprising persuaded ministers in Vienna that its status should be formalized, and consequently it was annexed. This move outraged Russia, not only because of its strong ties with Bosnia and neighbouring Serbia, but also because it threatened traditional Russian interests in and around the Black Sea and the Eastern Mediterranean. Eventually, in the face of the threat of German aggression, Russia backed down. However, the Bosnian annexation crisis was to further inflame an already feverish diplomatic situation in the Balkans. In particular, this strained relations between Serbia and Austria and Russia and Austria, creating a tinderbox that was finally lit a few years later after events at Sarajevo in June 1914.